Thank you for coming. This is a little overwhelming. I've done this talk a number of times over the years, that this is a slightly different talk because we've added additional information since the original book was written 10 years ago. Tomorrow will mark 90 years since those three bodies were found in Penn Township on the side of the mountain, and brought Carlisle into significant national attention because no one knew who these young girls were. And at the same time, in Blair County, bodies of two adults were found. And again, a great mystery as to what they were. So over the years, we've often got questions about it here, and that eventually led to me writing the book. So I'll give a little more background on how I came to write this book. I was the librarian at the time that the families from the West started coming back to Carlisle to find out what we knew about their relatives. For 70 years, they didn't talk about it. It was just completely it was a taboo topic. It was very difficult, as you can imagine, for the families. So there we go. This sign, many of you may be familiar with, along Route 233 as you drive up to Pine Grove Furnace State Park. I have to admit, as a child, I drove by this many times and never was smart enough to ask, what in the world is that all about? It was there. It was just a piece of the landscape, and so I didn't bring it up. And my parents would have been living within 2 or 3 miles of the site where the girls were found at that time in 1934. I have to further admit that my grandparents are buried 20 yards from that burial sign. And again, I never asked as a child. My mother faithfully decorated graves every Memorial Day, or Decoration Day, as she called it. And I never was smart enough to inquire, even with that connection, personal connection. So my real connection to this story begins in 2005, when the sister of one of the dead girls, came to the library, or actually sent a letter to the library asking about what we knew, what information we had about her sister. The oldest girl was a half sister of the two of the younger girls. They all had the same mother, but 2 different fathers. So the subsequent children born to Roland Sedgwick were half sisters to Norma, the oldest of the 3. So 70 years go by, and we don't know a whole lot about the story other than what appeared in the newspapers. But the families are the ones who really helped add to our information. The notebooks that are laying on the table come from both the Sedgwick family, Norma's family, and from the Noakes family, and eventually through marriage to the Hallowell, Daniels, Pierce, and Davis families. This evening, or this afternoon, one of those family members, Gary Davis, is going to present his family's collection. Gary.
I knew I was going to be part of the program, but you just caught me by surprise. We just enjoyed it. My name is Gary Davis, and how can I explain who I'm related to here? Okay, my grandmother Pearl Noakes is the mother of Winifred Pierce, and the sister of Elmo Noakes. Okay, my mother was my grandma Pearl's 7th child out of 8. There was 4 men and 4 women, okay? And as David said, this was not discussed in the family. I just explained something to David and Kira just a few minutes ago. That there was 8 children, 20 grandchildren, and over 50 great-grandchildren. My brother and I, or just the 2 of us, and our parents, we lived in Roseville, California. Our address was 300 Judah Street, and my grandmother's address was 212 Judah Street, just 4 houses up the street. So out of these 70 grandchildren and great-grandchildren, my brother and I knew Grandma Pearl better than anybody else. Everybody had moved away, just about except for Danny. Danny also, he was right next door in Citrus Heights, next to Roseville. And so over the years, my grandmother passed away at 103, Pearl Oaks, in 1990. My mother passed away in 2012. So that's the provenance behind these family documents that came from my grandmother to my mother to me. And I started working on them in the sense that I supplied David a few scans when he did the book back in 2015, or 2005 rather, right? 2015. Yeah, 15. Okay. And but I had all the rest of this material. It was in the same suitcase that probably been in for 80 years. I took pictures of the suitcases because I finally tossed them in a very tough shape. And I tried working on this, and like explained to Kara and Jennifer and David, I would work on it for a while, and it would overwhelm me. Because I really knew my grandmother and what an incredibly strong person she was. And when this story started coming out after she was gone, and my mother never told me much about it, I figured out, kind of talking to Danny and to David and going through all this, I realized there really is a story here, and there's some. What's interesting about these documents, there's a lot of Winnie documents in there, some Elmore documents, and it's truly classic. I want to just jump in a minute, if we can. First of all, congratulations to the Cumberland County Historical Society on the 150th anniversary. That is no small thing. The people of this town, and this county, and this state are blessed to have people like David and Kara and people who are dedicated to this cause of maintaining and developing their history. It's no small effort. And when I started working on this, I was telling David I'd have to put it away, not for a few days, but for a few months, because I was just overwhelmed. The other things I wanted to say, thanks to David, thanks to Kara for your patience, because this has been going on for a couple of years. But it worked out ironically that when I sent David 2 or 3 months ago, 3 dates that I'd like to come, this was the least favorite date that I had. Because we're turning right around in my family, coming back out east next week, but that's just the way it is. Actually, that covers probably everything I wanted to say. And just so you know, we're turning over all the original documents that we have, including the only original color picture of Winnie, birth certificates, baptismal certificates, letters, and the letters that came from the citizens of Cumberland County and the state of Pennsylvania and other places are remarkable. I think in our hearts, we feel a tremendous obligation to all of you, your ancestors that were part of all this, that took such good care of these babes and my aunt, my great uncle. There's no way the Pearson Oaks family can thank what's happened here. And I'm honestly happy to turn all this over to them, to the society here. And thanks again for everything. We have felt so welcome here when we've come in the past. It's absolutely remarkable. I think the same spirit that exists here today, it seems like in this community, would existed 90 years ago. That's one of the best ways to end it.
So with great appreciation, he had these two notebooks and the others that you see on the table. The one, as I mentioned, comes from the Sedgwick family. Two of the sisters, Norma, put together a notebook, and they have shared that with us. So that helped inform my research when I was writing the book. Dan Daniels, name you also see there, was one of the Noakes family, larger family, that came east to on several different occasions. And there are two notebooks, or three notebooks that he provided us with information. So this now adds quite a bit more. There is one more notebook on the table over there, and that also has tremendously helped inform my understanding of the story and the book that, or the addendum to the book that was now written. When I did that initial research, we were told the police records had been purged from that period, which from the perspective of the police, that was true. But they actually hadn't been purged. They had actually been moved to the police academy in Pershing. And so I found out about that in 2017, 2 years after the book was written. But the woman that informed me of that indicated that there wasn't a lot there. And interestingly enough, her reason for wanting to look into that was because she had heard that there were stories about ghosts appearing on the South Mountain in that area and voices being heard. So she was doing that kind of research, and this was just one of her stories she was researching. So I didn't immediately go and look at these records, and I'm glad I didn't, because when I went this summer to finally see what was there and met Tom Memmy, who was here. Tom, would you stand up along with me? Director of the museum, it's also here. I met with him. He had actually had a chance to spend some time with all of their collection that had been moved from the original Hershey Academy, Police Academy, to their new museum, and it greatly enhanced the understanding of those records. And so when I went there, there weren't 5 or 6 pages. There were 260 pages. And that is what is in the other notebook. So it's allowed that addendum to be written, which is available for sale along with the original book. Among the items that came in with the police collection was this photograph. We have a photograph that was sent to Pearl that showed an efforts of a small sign up, but the current sign was put up. But this is the actual police photo from the road showing the blankets where the babes were lying in. And that picture does appear in the book. It is in the police records, but we also had it when I wrote the book. So that's what it looked like when the bodies were found. Once they were uncovered. And the next thing I was able to find, almost all of my research for the book came from newspaper articles that we were able to use, plus what we received from the families. And this was a remembrance that was done about 30 years after the event, when the reporters got together and talked about their experiences back in 1934. One of the newspaper articles from 1934 was done by an AP correspondent, or I'm sorry, an address correspondent. And he interviewed the two men who found the bodies, John Clark and his nephew. And now come to the actual Pennsylvania State Police records. One of the things that I was very pleased, I didn't really learn a whole lot new from the police records, because fortunately back at that time, the newspaper reporters were very accurate. They apparently talked to the police, they apparently got the correct information and reflected accurately in the various newspaper articles. So that's the folder that everything was in when it was transferred to the State Police Academy's museum. There's a little notation on the lower right corner saying these records were purged. So I guess purging, according to them, meant them leaving. They weren't being housed in the police department anymore. This is the man who was put in charge of the investigation, Harry McElroy. And so many of the records that are in that notebook are ones that he was involved with. And that's an example of what those records look like. This is one that's describing the bodies and the clothing as they were found. I don't have a 1934 picture of Ewing Funeral Home, but this is what it looked like when it became a B&B in downtown Carlisle. In 1934, William Ewing had recently died, and so the business was being run by his wife, Jessie. And she was it was very unusual for a woman to have a license. She was the first woman in Pennsylvania to get a license to run a funeral home. However, she was not allowed to do the embalming. So they had to bring an embalmer in from Mechanicsburg to do that. I don't know why they didn't use a car on embalming, but they did. The two twins who lived on the top floor of the house, Seymour and William, many of you may remember them, remember thousands of people passing through that house because they didn't know who these three girls were, and it was an attempt to identify them, assuming that they were someone living. Of course, it turned out that they weren't. But they literally wore out the carpet. The carpeting had to be replaced after the funerals had been held. Scientists were called in to help with the investigation at that time. Hair analysis was a very new technique. Dr. Eddie from Dickinson conducted hair analysis. He was able to determine that the girls were sisters, but nothing beyond that. Photographs were taken. This is from the police records, and prints and footprints were taken of all three girls, in addition to the autopsies that were done. In the addendum, I have chosen not to include the autopsy reports. They are in the notebook for people who are interested in doing serious research, but they're pretty graphic. And I didn't feel like the death photos of the girls or of the actual autopsy reports were appropriate for broad publication. This is the newspaper photograph that was taken after the girls were placed in their coffins. When they were just placed on cots when people walked by to see if they could identify them, and then later placed in these coffins, where their funerals were held on December 1st. So they were found on the 24th, and they were buried on the 1st of December. I suppose at this point, Ann, would you uncover the white? At this point in the investigation, and as it was getting close to the time that the burials were going to be done, it was appropriate to do something after the burials that we could still continue beyond photographs to identify who they were. And so death masks were made. It was actually a fairly new technique, and there's police records about who actually did made the death masks. More than one copy of the death masks were made. Initially it was understood that there were 3. I think maybe there were actually 5. But this is the set that was maintained at the Ewing Funeral Home. There was another set maintained by the coroner. There was a set made by the man from Mechanicsburg, Mr. Myers, who did the autopsy, the official involvement, and the police maintained a set. So that's at least 4 of them. And today, we've discovered that the set that was kept by the coroner actually were not preserved in county records. Because at that time, I guess the coroner's office was sort of unofficial. And Dave Norris is here. He's sharing with us in the brown box another set of the death masks.
I can actually provide a little more clarity to you as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Dave Norris. My father, Michael Norris, was the Cumberland County coroner for 28 years. So the Cumberland County coroner had kind of a unique position in Cumberland County. When Dad was elected in the early 80s, the prior coroner was a pathologist at Carlisle Hospital, and had always used his pathology office as the coroner's office. So when Dad was elected in the early 80s, there was no official office space for the coroner. So he brought the coroner's office into the front porch of our home. Now, obviously, not where the bodies were, but the record keeping, the secretarial work, my mother actually became the secretary. So we grew up with death as kind of a part of our life because Dad was the Cumberland County coroner when we were growing up. So as a result, for years and years, probably 15 of his 28 years in office, the coroner's office was in our home. Whether it was our older home on Silver Spring Road or when we moved out to Monroe Acres, had a front room that the office was located in, and any of miscellaneous records or whatever were always stored in the basement. Unfortunately, recently, the beginning of September, my dad passed away. And one of the things that I needed to do was go through Dad's belongings. So literally, and again, you hear things as kids and whatever, but literally in the top of one of the closets of Dad's now 3rd home since he originally became coroner was a paper box. And on the side was a sticky note in my mom's handwriting that simply said, "Death masks." So we had heard for years that Dad had maintained a set of the Babes in the Woods death masks. And now upon his death, I'm able to clarify that story a little more. My assumption had always been it was part of those records that he got from the coroner's office. It was recently clarified for me by Mike Malpezzi of Malpezzi's Funeral Home that these were in fact the set that was maintained at Myers Funeral Home, that at one point years ago, somebody said, we should just toss these out. At which point Mike Malpezzi made sure to mention to my father that they were there. He took them home and preserved them. So now they will join their rightful place, donated in the honor of my father, Mike Norris.
Thanks, Dave, and for the additional perspective. Actually, I didn't know that last part of what you just said.
I just learned that.
Oh,
That's why I wanted to share. That's why I thought you made you think you had an extra set.
So
but that
this is
clarifies.
actually the Myers.
Yes.
That became the Malvezzi.
Yeah.
So at any rate, that's great clarification. Thank you. Dr. Hageley was the coroner at the time that this occurred. So that's your progression of people who were involved with this case from the beginning. Now we skip to Blair County, and that's where the additional bodies were found near the town of Hollidaysburg and also to the town of Duncansville, which you can see there at the bottom of the map. The flag station where the bodies were found is the highlighted part in yellow. And this is the actual flag station. It's no longer there. This is where Elmo and Winnie died. And back at that time, at least in Blair County, we didn't have funeral homes as we know them today. In Duncansville, they just had a furniture store, and the owner of the furniture store, Mr. Liebergott, could do embalming. So bodies were brought there. In this case, those two bodies were brought, and he did the embalming in the back of the store. And then again, in unknown bodies, thousands of people walked by those bodies. At one time at the back of the store, and some reports say that they actually got moved into those front rooms of the store. It's an antique shop. When I was there 10 years ago, I'm not sure if it's even still, it is still there.
But it's not under the name of Dominic anymore.
Okay,
They retired and sold it to somebody.
okay, so it's still an antique store. At the time, we didn't have a picture of the car, and the car is the key to solving all of this about who they are. So I found this photo online and used it in the book. But in the police records, there is the actual car. When Elmo and Winnie left the bodies on the side of the mountain, they just started driving, and apparently they drove north and then west and ended up on the road to Altoona when the car ran out of gas. So what little money they had, they didn't choose to put more gas in the car. They just started to walk. The car was eventually found by local people, stripped of many of the things like the batteries and so on. And the car was then towed to McVeigh, the nearest town where the car had run out of gas, and was kept there. And that's where when the police started investigating the car, the original serial number had been filed off, but there was another place on the crank case where that number also appeared, and based on that car's identification, they traced it back to California and then determined who the owner was, and then the story begins to unfold as to who these people actually were. When I was doing the research for the book, I met with Don Neely. He had also gathered information for years about this event, and he lived nearby. And his father, Cloyd Neely, he was 102 in this picture.
His brother.
It's his brother, okay. He was living in the nursing home at the time that I was there, and he remembered distinctly being one of the people who walked by that body 5 times. He was 22 years old at the time. He and his friends were fascinated by this, and one of the sort of sad parts of this that they weren't clothed. They were just under sheets, and there was no protection. So if you wanted to pick up a sheet, you could, and they did. So that was sort of a sad part of the story, but at least someone that we could interview who had actually been there. In the police records, these are the death photos. I did publish those in the addendum. Obviously, Elmo on the left and Winifred on the right. Back to Cumberland County, part of the mystery has not yet been solved. But a suitcase was found called a Gladstone bag. And the contents of the suitcase included all kinds of clothing, including adult clothing as well as children's clothing. And some of the clothing seemed to be related to what the girls were wearing. So they thought this was a definite connection. It was found by a hunter down near the intersection of Old Bottom Road and Centerville Road. And it was in York County. The police went and claimed it. That's where the hunters actually lived. And it becomes part of the record of the whole case. Among the things in that was a puzzle book, and with the name Norma written on it. So it was another clue that once we figured out who they were, that helped establish that this did belong to this particular case. The community responded, the Carlisle community, responded to this because they realized that it was getting to the point, girls had been found on the 24th, it turned out they had died on the 21st, and there was a need to bury them. And so they started a burial fund, the American Legion spearheaded that. And interestingly enough, this particular photo where the contributions were being collected was taken in what was then Central Bookstore, which then became Pearson Miller's office. It's now our gift store for the Historical Society. Funds were raised and plans were made for the funerals. By this time, the identities were known. And this picture was provided by the family. And then initially, you'll see numbers written on the girls' clothing. They were initially identified in the order in which they were placed on the mountain. So their original numbers were DeWilla, the oldest of the actual Noakes girls, number one, Cordelia, number 2, who was placed in the middle, and Norma, number 3, who was placed the farthest from the road. So they had placed the youngest girl between the 2 older girls. The renumbering was then done once they knew who they were. And so Norma is now number 1, DeWilla number 2, and Cordelia number 3. This newspaper photo shows them outside the funeral parlor. They actually used 3 different hearses to take the girls to the cemetery. And this shows them as they were being loaded into the vans. And then this other picture shows them out at the cemetery. It was very rainy that day, pouring actually. Very similar to the weather we had yesterday. So at any rate, you can see the umbrellas and 2 of the 3 caskets. Among the police records are these that describe the clothing being worn by all 3 girls and by Winifred and Elma. No decision at this point had been made about the burial of Elma and Winnie. So the plan was initially made that they would be buried in Potter's Field at the Blair County home, which was located very close by. So this is a picture I took of that same site. It had not changed in the 80 years after the actual events. This is Winifred's invoice for her burial. It turned out that you'll see Mrs. Pearl Pierce written there. So she actually paid for her daughter's funeral. So that was not paid for by the American Legion. The American Legion, because Elmo was a veteran, paid for his funeral. The decision was made, and I'm not sure how this decision was made, but to bring them back Winnie and Elmo, when they're buried in Westminster, within sight of the girls' tombstone, on 2 different plots, but they happen to adjoin each other, so it appears that they're buried together, but they're not. They're 2 different burial plots. Interestingly enough, and I don't know if this is because of the connection to this tragic story, or It just happens to me. But there are no other burials in that part of the cemetery to this day. This is Elmo Noakes' tombstone. It's a military tombstone. It has the wrong date on it. We've never been able to figure out why November the 9th. They were still in California on November the 9th. It also lays flat, and I don't think it ever stood up. Doesn't appear that it ever did. This was Winnie's, also the incorrect date. Again, we don't know why. On one of those trips, east, I think it was the last one.
It was 2006 when we were all.
Oh, okay, 2006, when the families came in, they replaced this tombstone. So there's now one with the correct date of death, which is November 23rd. The family, of course, didn't know what was going on. The Noakes family left very suddenly, no warning, didn't even stop to get his last paycheck. It was just a very precipitous move. So these reports are coming across the country about these young girls being found, and then eventually two adults being found. But there was no way that the Pierce family could know, or the Noakes family could know it was their family. It was actually part of this story. But on Thanksgiving Day, they found out. And as Gary just mentioned, a variety of letters were sent to Pearl from people here in the East. And one of them sent this photo. So someone had put up a temporary sign to show where this had occurred. There were, as had happened with both the funeral homes, the site also attracted attention. It was reported that cars were lined up for a mile to be able to go and look at the site where the bodies were found. The same thing out at Westminster. Cars practically blocked the road if they wanted to stop and take a look at the site where the girls were buried before the tombstone was put up. A large component of the 260 pages of material in the state police collection are items documenting the case after the funerals. So each, in the notebook, it's all organized by date. So November 24th is the first date, and then subsequently everything out until the last report on January 25th are flagged with the sticky notes to show the records that were being taken together at that time. They appear almost daily through December. So the records don't stop, or the research doesn't stop when after the burials, and whatever they are, and after the burials, the records continue because the police want to know what happened here. Why did this happen? Why did this tragedy occur? And so there are almost, as I said, almost daily reports up to the end of January. The police spent hundreds and hundreds of hours tracking down information. Any little piece of evidence that they could determine, they would go and investigate. And this included the towns that you see listed on this slide. And it also involved a trip to New York City, because the girls' coats were manufactured in New York City. And of course, before we knew who they were, they thought any lead might lead them to identification. So it was an amazing amount of work, police hours, man hours that were done. An interesting thing that I discovered in reading through some of these is almost in every case, two police officers went to do each of the investigations. And the reason that there were two is that one was the stenographer. He used shorthand to record everything that was said in the interviews, and then they would all be typed up. So the results of the things in the notebook are the typing up of all of those reports. So they interviewed hotel people, tourist home people, gas station attendants, restaurant owners, waitresses, In one case, a restaurant in Philadelphia, they interviewed one of the patrons. She had noticed that they didn't seem, the family didn't order 5 meals. They ordered like 3, and then they shared the food. So she invited one of the girls to come sit with her and feed her. And now we have the family. Gary's already introduced some of this to you. Mary Hayford is the mother of all the girls. She was originally married to Roland Sedgwick. That's when Norma was born. And when Norma was 2, they divorced. And shortly soon thereafter married Elmo. And then there were 2 additional children. All 3 of the girls, as you know, were living with Elmo at the time. The family is constantly moving. They were minors. They mainly lived in Utah, but eventually, for a variety of reasons, we're talking about the Great Depression, they moved west to California because there were better opportunities for employment. The reason some of the names are highlighted is that they're ones who really stand out as you read through the research of this. So Pearl, who you know is Gary's grandmother, Kate, his sister. There were 2 Winifreds. There was Winifred, who was a sister of Pearl, and then of course Winifred, who was her daughter, and of course Elmo, and other family members are shown there. And then in the Pierce family, Pearl and Hugh's children are shown listed there. And the reason Winifred is highlighted is that that's the young Winnie. And Betty is highlighted because she was one of the family members who came east. So she was here when I got to meet her. This is the Hayford Sedgwick wedding photo. Oh, with that moving around that was done, the notes Pierce Daniels family lived in that house in Brownsville. This is among the things that Dan Daniels shared with us. And Dan's supposition is that because all of this family, not just one piece of it, all of them, are living together in the house. And that he thinks maybe some of the seeds of problems within the family may have started because of having this close connection with all these family members living together. This is Mary Noakes' death certificate in 1932, so 2 years before the tragic events in November. And unfortunately, it adds another sad dimension to this story. She died from a botched abortion. And another sad piece of the story that seems to emerge from some of the research and the writings is that for some reason Elmo didn't like pregnant women. And he apparently became very distant and difficult during the time that Mary was pregnant with the 2 girls that they had together. And so I guess they suspect that maybe she did this because she didn't like the way she was being treated by Elmo. That picture you've seen before, this is the newspaper photo that appears after the girls have been identified. Thanks to Gary, we have pictures of where the family was living. This is where the Pierces were living in Roseville, California at this point. And this is where Elmo and his family were living. Part of the dissension in the family was caused because Winnie, the young Winnie, dropped out of high school to help take care of the 3 girls. And at some point, other Pierce family members were uncomfortable with that and possibly made things difficult for Elmo and Winnie, and this may have contributed to their flight across country. This is the life insurance policy that Elmo had as part of his work. with the Pacific Fruit Express Company. Roseville to this day is still a railroad town, and it was back in the 40s as well. So he had a good employment. And when he left precipitously on the 10th of November, he didn't pick up his paycheck. So for some reason, they felt they had to get away. And that's when he aged 18. So as I said, possibly concerned with their relationship. There's some report that Winnie's brothers in particular had been difficult. And we also know that Roland Sedgwick had attempted to regain custody of Roland. So that may have been some reason for them getting away. We're pretty certain that they didn't go through Utah. Again, probably trying to avoid Roland Sedgwick, and it's a legal attempt to get Norma back. And then these newspaper articles report on this dissension within the family. One of the reasons that this story was not talked about for 70 years within the family, other than the extreme tragedy of it, is that there were reports of the sisters really battling with each other during this period. And so up until this one of these trips that your family made east, branches of the family did not talk to each other. And there was some healing that went on among the various branches of the family because of that attempt to get everybody back. There was actually, I think, a reunion in Utah, or was it in California? California. It was in California, where different branches of the family got together before their trip east, and in particular to do the new gravestone for.
David, it was actually a memorial service that Danny arranged for the five. It was held by
For the various
branches
branches
of
of
the
the family. Yeah. So what we've been able to learn from the trip, the car was purchased roughly on the 9th or the 10th of November. They left on the 11th. We found one record of getting gas in western Pennsylvania. So that whole main block of the country we don't know anything about, except that in the car they found something from a tourist home in Illinois. They were in Gettysburg on the 21st. We also knew that they were in Philadelphia on the 18th. That's where that restaurant story occurred, and there's evidence of the tourist home that they stayed in there. Because the bodies, we're pretty sure now that the police records initially were not sure. There's a whole lot in the police records about when did it rain and how much did it rain. It was wet that week. But based on when Winnie and Elma were found, we're pretty sure that they had died on the 21st of November. Of course, they got to Altoona, hitchhiking from the Baytown area, stayed in a hotel on that night, Congress Hotel, and the murder-suicide occurred on the 23rd. And then the bodies of both the girls and Linda were found on the 24th. So the family started coming east, as I said. That's when I got to meet them in 2004 and 5, and then on in, right up to as recently as the 80th anniversary, there were members of the family that came east. And you have seen the first collection that Gary has presented us with, and we are so encouraged to have that. Unfortunately, that means I'm going to have to do another. It is my plan, if I can find the time, to incorporate the addendum into a new edition of the book. And I will also go through this information and find out what I may not have properly reported on in the first edition of the book. This story has remained alive in Cumberland County throughout all of these years. I found newspaper articles that date back to the 40s. The new sign was put up in that township. The sign's a whole separate chapter in the book. It was interesting enough, it was put up by a group from Allen's County. It shows, you can read the book and figure that out. In 84, 94, in 2004, the Sedgwick family appealed for a death certificate change for Norma, so it correctly lists Roland Sedgwick as her father, not Elmo. And then the family visits 2007, 2014 for the 80th anniversary. The State Police Archive gives tremendous amount of new information. And I think the State Police, obviously, because of the uniqueness of this case, valued the case. And the last thing that Tom Memmy sent me is this photograph in 1938 of the Police Academy classroom. And if you look up on the top of the photograph, so that's the gun, and those are the masks. That concludes my comments. Any questions? Well, thank you very much.